First contact. Zara gripped the controls of her scout ship, her eyes narrowed in determination as Earth's atmosphere blazed outside the view screen. This primitive planet would soon fall to the might of the Zorian Empire, its inhabitants enslaved or eradicated. As a seasoned warrior, Zara relished the challenge of conquest. Suddenly, alarms blared through the cockpit. The ship bucked and shuddered, panels erupting in showers of sparks. Cursing in her native tongue, Zara fought to regain control, but it was too late. The scout craft spiraled downward, plummeting through layers of clouds. Treetops rushed up to meet her, and with a bone-shattering impact, everything went black. Grayson Hawkins meandered along the forest trail, inhaling deeply the crisp scent of pine. As a park ranger, he cherished these quiet moments communing with nature, far from the noise and bustle of civilization. It was just him, the trees, and the occasional forest creature, until a thunderous boom shattered the tranquility. Heart pounding, Grayson raced towards the sound, heedless of branches whipping at his face. He burst into a clearing and skidded to a stop, mouth agape. A trail of broken trees led to a crumpled heap of metal, smoke billowing from the wreckage. It looked like no aircraft he'd ever seen. Warily, Grayson approached the downed craft. Twisted shards of some unearthly alloy jutted up like the ribs of a carcass. He placed a tentative hand on the hull, flinching at the heat still emanating from it. As he circled around, he spotted what appeared to be a hatch, now bent and wedged partially open. Grayson squinted into the dark interior, then recoiled as a low moan drifted out. There was someone alive in there. "Hello," he called, trying to peer further into the gloom. "Can you hear me? I'm here to help." Another groan answered him, laced with pain. Grayson set his jaw. He had to get whoever it was out of there before the wreckage ignited. Bracing himself, he gripped the edge of the hatch and heaved. Metal shrieked in protest and his muscles screamed, but slowly, inch by hard-fought inch, the hatch gave way until the opening was wide enough to squeeze through. Grayson clambered inside, blinking to let his eyes adjust to the darkness. Acrid smoke stung his nostrils, and he coughed, fumbling for the flashlight at his belt. The beam cut through the haze, illuminating a scene of destruction. Jagged metal, dangling wires, puddles of viscous fluid. And there, strapped into a chair in the center of it all, was the pilot. Except Grayson had never seen a pilot like this before. Even battered and bleeding, the woman was strikingly beautiful, her skin a rich shade of azure, her hair a wild mane of silver. A latticework of glowing lines traced delicate patterns across her high cheekbones and down her neck, disappearing into the collar of her fitted black flight suit. She looked human, and yet not. The woman's eyes fluttered open, fixing Grayson with a gaze of molten gold. Her full lips parted, and she spoke in a language like nothing he'd ever heard, lilting and lyrical. He gaped at her, uncomprehending. She tried again, and this time he caught one word: help. The irony struck him. Here he'd been thinking to rescue her, and she'd just made the same plea to him. At that moment, all thoughts of her otherworldly appearance fled. Injured and in pain, she needed aid. "It's okay," he soothed, reaching to unfasten her safety harness. "I'm going to get you out of here. Just hold on." The woman endured his fumbling attempts to free her in silence, though he caught the occasional flash of irritation in those mesmerizing eyes. Finally, the last buckle gave way, and she slumped forward with a hiss. Grayson caught her, propping her up as gently as he could. "Can you stand?" he asked, gesturing with his free hand. "We need to move." She stared at him blankly for a moment, then gave a curt nod. Draping one of her arms across his shoulders, Grayson braced her against his side, and together they staggered towards the hatch. It was slow going, every step an effort. By the time they emerged into the sun-dappled clearing, they were both panting and drenched in sweat. Grayson guided her a safe distance from the wreck before easing her down to rest against a sturdy oak. In the daylight, her injuries looked even worse. One arm hung at an unnatural angle, Deep lacerations marred her forehead and torso, and purplish bruises mottled nearly every inch of visible skin. A pang of sympathy lanced through him. "Wait here," he said, making what he hoped was a reassuring gesture. "I'm going to get my first aid kit and call for help. Just don't move, okay?" Leaving her propped against the tree, Grayson sprinted back towards the ranger station, his mind a whirl. He knew he should be terrified, or at least freaked out. A spaceship, an honest-to-God flying saucer, had just crashed practically in his backyard, complete with an alien pilot straight out of a sci-fi movie. It was the kind of discovery that would change the world forever. And yet, all he could think about was the battered woman waiting for him in the forest. Alien or not, she was hurt and alone on a strange planet, completely dependent on him for survival. As he burst into the station and began frantically gathering supplies, he made himself a promise. Grayson would do whatever it took to help her. No matter where she came from or why she was here, he'd make sure she recovered in safety and comfort. His life, he suspected, was about to get a whole lot more complicated. But looking after others was what he did best. Human or alien, Grayson Hawkins took care of those in need. It was as simple as that. Worlds collide. Zara watched warily as the human male rushed about the small dwelling, gathering an assortment of supplies. Pain lanced through her body with every movement, but she bit back any sound of discomfort. She would not show weakness, especially not in front of a member of such a primitive species. And yet the human, Grayson, he'd called himself, seemed different from what she'd expected based on her people's intel. He pulled her from the wreckage without hesitation, tended to her wounds with gentle hands, and even offered her food and water. Such kindness was unheard of among the Zorians, where only strength and ruthlessness were valued. As if sensing her gaze, Grayson glanced over and offered a tentative smile. "Doing all right. I know this must be pretty overwhelming, waking up on an alien planet and all." Zara bristled. She was a warrior, not some helpless damsel. "I am fine," she bit out, the human language feeling clumsy on her tongue. "I do not require your concern." Grayson held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Easy there, tough guy. I'm just trying to help. You're obviously not from around here, and I figured you could use a friend." "I do not need friends," Zara snapped, "especially not human ones." A flicker of hurt crossed Grayson's face, but he masked it quickly. "Fair enough. But like it or not, you're stuck with me for now. Your ship is toast, and even if you could contact your people, I'm guessing they wouldn't be too thrilled to find you injured and defenseless on enemy territory." Zara opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. Much as she hated to admit it, the human had a point. She was in no condition to fend for herself, and the idea of her commander Vorsic seeing her like this made her scales prickle with shame. Until she recovered, she would have to rely on Grayson. "Very well," she ground out. "I will accept your assistance for now. But do not mistake this for friendship, human. You are still my enemy." To her surprise, Grayson just chuckled. "Whatever you say, Space Warrior. Now how about some dinner? I make a mean spaghetti." Over the next days, an uneasy truce formed between the unlikely pair. Zara remained on guard, watching Grayson's every move for signs of treachery, but the human seemed unaware of her scrutiny, going about his daily tasks with an easy warmth that baffled her. He changed her bandages, brought her meals, and even fashioned a makeshift crutch to help her get around, all without any apparent ulterior motive. And yet, as much as she distrusted his kindness, Zara found herself drawn to him. Grayson was unlike any being she'd ever met, human or Zorian. He had a quick wit and an easy laugh, and a way of looking at the world with wonder rather than calculation. He told her stories of his life in the forest, of the creatures he cared for, and the beauty he found in solitude. Zara listened despite herself, marveling at the alien concepts of peace and contentment. Even more unsettling were the physical reactions he stirred in her, the brush of his fingers against her skin as he checked her wounds, the warmth of his smile when he caught her looking. These things sent unfamiliar sensations coursing through her body, heating her blood in a way that had nothing to do with combat. It was maddening, this effect he had on her. A distraction she could ill afford. Matters came to a head one evening as they sat beside the hearth, watching the flickering flames. Grayson was telling her a story about something called marshmallows when Zara felt an irresistible impulse overtake her. Leaning in close, she silenced him with a kiss. For a moment Grayson froze, his eyes wide. Then, to Zora's surprise, he returned the kiss with a fervor that matched her own. His arms came around her, mindful of her injuries, and she melted into his embrace, her heart pounding. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. "Zara," Grayson murmured, wonder in his voice. "You know this is crazy, right? We're from different worlds." "I know," she whispered, "but right now I do not care." As they came together again in a tangle of limbs, rational thought fled. There was only sensation, hot and urgent, as they explored each other with hands and mouths. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and the rest of the universe fell away until only the two of them remained, lost in a forbidden moment of connection. But even as she surrendered to passion, a small cold part of Zara's mind reminded her that this idyll could not last. She had a mission, a duty to her people. Sooner or later, she would have to choose between her heart and her orders. And that choice was fast approaching. Betrayal and revelations. A thunderous boom jolted Zara and Grayson from sleep, the cabin quaking around them. They leaped from the bed, adrenaline already surging. That was no ordinary noise. It was the sound of a ship breaching atmosphere. Zara's heart clenched. She knew that engine timbre all too well. The Zorians had come for her. She burst outside, Grayson hot on her heels. There, descending from the sky on plumes of blue-white exhaust, was a Zorian battlecruiser, its sleek black hull bristling with weaponry. Zara's gut turned to ice. It wasn't a rescue party. It was a full-scale assault. The cruiser settled to the ground with a tremendous thud, flattening trees and sending wildlife fleeing in all directions. A ramp lowered from its belly, and a phalanx of armored warriors marched out, pulse rifles at the ready. At their head strode a towering figure in ornate battle regalia, his eyes cold and merciless. Commander Vorsic. Zara stepped forward, squaring her shoulders despite the pain that lanced through her still healing body. She would not cower, not even before her superior. "Commander," she called, raising a fist to her chest in salute. "I am honored by your presence." Vorsic's gaze raked over her, taking in her battered state, and the human at her side. His lip curled. "You should be on your knees begging my forgiveness, not pretending at honor. You have disgraced yourself and our entire race." Behind her, Zara heard Grayson suck in a sharp breath, but she didn't dare turn to look at him. She kept her eyes locked on Vorsic. "I was injured in the crash," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "This human discovered me and provided aid. I am in his debt." Vorsic scoffed. "Azorian, indebted to a primitive. You sicken me." His gaze flicked to Grayson, filled with undisguised contempt. "I should vaporize this creature where it stands." Zara moved to place herself between them, her heart pounding. "No, he is under my protection." Vorsic's eyes narrowed. "You would defy me? For a human?" "I would do what is right," Zara said, lifting her chin. "Grayson saved my life. I will not let him be harmed." For a long, tense moment, Vorsic stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he let out a harsh bark of laughter. "I see now the depths of your disgrace. You have feelings for this creature, don't you?" Zara flinched, but said nothing. There was no point in denying it, not when Vorsic could surely see the truth in her face. The commander shook his head. "Pathetic. But perhaps your perversion can still be of use." He turned to his warriors. "Seize the human. We will make an example of it to any other primitives who might think to stand against us." "No!" The cry tore from Zara's throat as the soldiers surged forward. She leaped to put herself between them and Grayson, but pain slowed her movements. Rough hands seized her, yanking her away as another group grabbed Grayson. The human struggled fiercely, landing a solid punch on one soldier before being overwhelmed and dragged towards the ship. "Zara," he shouted, straining against his captors. "Don't let them do this. You know this is wrong." Tears blurred Zara's vision as she fought uselessly against the warriors restraining her. Everything in her screamed to protect Grayson, to defy her commander's cruelty. But the instinct to obey, hammered into her since birth, was too strong. She went limp, despair washing over her. And then, with a shock like a bolt of lightning, she felt it. A flutter deep in her belly, faint but unmistakable. Life stirring inside her. Grayson's child. In that moment, everything crystallized with blinding clarity. Her pain, the changes in her body, her uncharacteristic emotions. It all made sense now. She was pregnant, carrying a hybrid human-Zorian child. A child born of love, not conquest. Resolve hardened in Zara's core, banishing her despair. She could not submit to Vorsik's tyranny, not now that she carried this fragile new life. For her child, for Grayson, she would defy an empire, even if it meant her own destruction. With a wrench of her body, Zara broke free of the soldiers holding her. She charged at Vorsik, a battle cry on her lips, heedless of the rifles trained on her. The commander turned, surprise flickering across his face, and in that split second of distraction, Zara attacked. Her fist slammed into Vorsik's jaw with all her strength. His head snapped back and he stumbled, but didn't go down. With a roar of rage, he lashed out at her, and the battle was joined. They traded blows savagely, Zara's injuries screaming with every movement, but her utter determination driving her on. In her peripheral vision, she saw Grayson break free and leap to her aid, taking on the dumbfounded soldiers with nothing but his fists and his fierce human will. Together they fought, side by side, an alien and a human against all odds. For the chance at a future. For love. The stand. Chaos erupted around Zara and Grayson as they battled Vorsik and his warriors. Pulse blasts seared the air, setting the forest ablaze, while the cries of the wounded and dying filled their ears. Zara fought with the desperate strength of a cornered animal, her pain fueling her rage, but she knew they were hopelessly outmatched. There were too many soldiers, too many weapons, but she would not surrender. Not while her child, their child, still lived. "Grayson," she shouted over the din. "We need help. Is there anyone?" She didn't get to finish. At that moment, a pulse blast caught her in the shoulder, spinning her around. She hit the ground hard, stars exploding across her vision. Dimly, she heard Grayson scream her name. Then he was there, standing over her, wielding a fallen soldier's rifle. He fired at the advancing warriors, forcing them back, then reached down to haul Zara to her feet. "I've got an idea," he panted, "but we need to buy some time." Zara nodded grimly, pushing aside her pain. Together they fell back, fighting for every inch, as Grayson shouted into a device on his wrist. Zara caught snatches of his words. Emergency, invasion, need backup. But her focus remained on the battle, on keeping herself and her mate alive. Minutes that felt like hours passed in a blur of blood and fire. Just when Zara was certain they could hold out no longer, an approaching roar filled the air. She risked a glance skyward, and her jaw dropped. Helicopters, dozens of them, bearing down on the battlefield with grim purpose. They opened fire on the Zorian positions, missiles and machine guns tearing into the alien ranks. Warriors scattered, some firing back futilely, others fleeing for the dubious safety of their ship. "The cavalry's here," Grayson crowed. "I knew the Rangers wouldn't let me down." Zara could only stare in shock as humans in military gear repelled from the choppers, joining the fray with astonishing ferocity. They moved like a well-oiled machine, their weapons unfamiliar but devastatingly effective. The Zorians, despite their superior technology, quickly found themselves outflanked and overwhelmed. In the midst of the chaos, Vorsic stood his ground, still trading blows with Zara and Grayson. His face was a mask of rage and disbelief. "Primitives," he spat. "You think you can defeat the might of the Zorian Empire? We will raise your world to ashes." "Not today," Grayson snarled. "And not ever. This is our home, and we'll die before we let you take it." He punctuated his words with a vicious strike of his rifle butt to Vorsic's head. The commander went down, his eyes rolling back, and did not rise again. For a moment, Zara could only stare at her former leader's prone form, hardly daring to believe it was over. Then a sharp pain lanced through her belly, and she doubled over with a gasp. "Zara!" Grayson was at her side in an instant, his face etched with concern. "What's wrong?" "The baby," she gritted out. "I think it's coming." Grayson's eyes widened. For a second he looked as terrified as Zara felt. Then his jaw firmed with resolve. Okay, we can do this. I've got you." He began barking orders to the rangers around them, calling for medics, for transport, for a safe place to take her. As he worked, cradling her to his chest, Zara felt a wave of love and gratitude wash over her. She had chosen well in this human. He would move mountains for her, for their child. Together, they could face anything. Even as another contraction seized her, Zara held on to that thought like a talisman. A new life was beginning, in more ways than one. She could only pray they would all live to see it. A new beginning. Pain. Blinding, searing, overwhelming. It filled Zara's world, blotting out all else. She clung to Grayson's hand like a lifeline as her body heaved and strained, bearing down with every scrap of strength she possessed. "That's it, Zara," Grayson encouraged, his voice strained but steady. "You're doing great. Just a little more." Zara wanted to scream that he had no idea what he was talking about, that this was unlike any pain a human could imagine. But all that emerged was a guttural groan as another contraction gripped her. Hours passed in a haze of agony and effort. The medics Grayson had summoned flitted around her, their faces taut with concentration as they monitored her condition. They'd never seen a birth like this, Zara knew, a hybrid of two worlds, conceived in love against all odds. No one knew what to expect, least of all her. Just when Zara was certain she could endure no more, that her body would surely tear itself apart, a new sensation overtook her, an irresistible urge to push. She bore down with a primal scream, feeling something shift deep within her. "I see the head," one of the medics cried. "Just one more push, Zara. You can do it." Zara squeezed her eyes shut, gathering every last ounce of will. For Grayson. For their child. For the future. With a final, wrenching heave, she felt a slippery mass slide from her body, and then a thin, reedy wail split the air. Zara fell back, her entire body trembling with exhaustion and relief. Beside her, Grayson let out a choked sob. "It's a girl," he said, wonder and joy suffusing his voice. "Oh, Zara, she's perfect." Through bleary eyes, Zara watched the medics clean and swaddle the squalling infant before placing her gently in Grayson's arms. He cradled her with a tenderness that made Zora's heart seize, then turned to lay her on Zora's chest. For a long moment, Zara could only stare. The baby was tiny, wrinkled, her features an uncanny blend of human and Zorian. But to Zora, she was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. A shock of downy black hair covered her head, and when she blinked open, unfocused eyes, they shone a brilliant gold, just like Zora's own. Tears slipped down Zora's cheeks as she traced a trembling finger over the delicate ridges marking the baby's cheekbones. Her daughter. Her and Grayson's daughter. Distantly, she was aware of a commotion outside, raised voices drawing nearer. A moment later, the door burst open to admit a contingent of armed Zorian warriors, Vorsic at their head. Zara tensed, curling protectively around her newborn. But to her shock, the warriors did not attack. Instead, they halted in their tracks, their eyes wide as they took in the scene before them. "What is this?" Vorsic demanded, his gaze darting from Zara to the baby to Grayson and back. "What have you done, Zara?" Grayson stepped forward, placing himself between the Zorians and the bed. "She's done something incredible," he said firmly. "She's given birth to a child of both our worlds, a symbol of the peace and connection we could have, if only we choose it." Vorsic's face twisted with revulsion and anger, but behind him, Zara saw some of the warriors exchanging uncertain looks. A few even lowered their weapons, awe and curiosity overtaking aggression. Emboldened, Zara raised her chin. "Vorsic, look at her. Really look. This child is the future, a future where Zorians and humans live together, learn from each other, a future of cooperation, not conquest." She held out the baby, meeting Vorsic's gaze steadily. "I thought as you did, once. I thought strength meant domination, that empathy was weakness. But Grayson and his people have shown me a different way, a better way." Zara took a deep breath. "We have a chance here, a chance to be more than what we were. I choose to take that chance. For my daughter. And I ask all of you, to do the same." For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, Vorsic reached out and laid one large hand on the baby's head, infinitely gentle. "Perhaps," he said, voice gruff with an emotion Zara had never heard from him before. "Perhaps you are right, Zara. Perhaps this is a new beginning, for all of us." Around the room, the other warriors nodded, some even smiling as they looked upon the child. A child of two worlds, a promise of a brighter tomorrow. And as Zara leaned into Grayson's embrace, their daughter cradled between them, she felt a profound sense of hope bloom within her. They had dreamed an impossible dream, and through their love, made it real. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, conflicts, old prejudices to overcome on both sides. But in that moment, gazing at the miracle they had created together, Zara knew one thing with bone-deep certainty. It would be worth it.